Welcome, everyone. This is Hillel Neuer, Executive Director of UN Watch, based in Geneva. I'm actually speaking to you from Paris, France, and we are meeting for an emergency panel on the situation in Iran. We have two eminent guests from whom we will hear from shortly. We have Alireza Akhondi, who is a member of the Swedish Parliament, a leader in the battle for human rights in Iran, someone who's organized major events in Europe, has spoken for our organization at the United Nations, challenged the Islamic regime in very powerful ways that you can see on the internet, and has addressed our Geneva Summit for Human Rights. And we're thrilled that we're going to hear from Alireza shortly. We'll then hear from our guest, Kaveh Shahrooz. He is an eminent human rights lawyer from Canada, graduate of Harvard University. He's a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, a very well-known figure in holding the Iran lobby to account, those apologists for the Islamic regime. One of the world experts in exposing them and calling them out is Kaveh Shahrooz. We also, like Alireza, we had the honor to host Kaveh in Geneva at our Geneva Summit for Human Rights a couple of years ago. And I'll just mention, since we're talking about it, that our next Geneva Summit will be the 18th annual Geneva Summit that we'll host on February 18th in Geneva. People can find the information at genevasummit.org. Our keynote speaker will be Masih Alinejad, the famous Iranian human rights activist, women's rights activist, and journalist who was targeted for kidnapping and assassination 3 times. I attended the trial of her would-be assassins a year ago in Manhattan. She just spoke yesterday to the Security Council. A very powerful speech that you can see online. Also with her speaking was Ahmed Batabi, who is the original Iranian speaker that we had 18 years ago at our first Geneva Summit in 2009. He was a political prisoner. He was arrested for demonstrating against the regime. They told him, "You're an enemy of God," because his photograph was plastered on the front cover of The Economist magazine, protesting against the regime. So the two of them spoke. I was filled with pride to see my two courageous friends speaking at the Security Council. Sadly, to bring you now back to where things are at the United Nations and to give you sort of the UN Watch update, the Security Council, though very importantly, put a spotlight and mobilized world attention and had these two powerful dissidents speaking. Of course, the outcome we knew would not achieve a condemnation of Iran because, of course, China and Russia hold the veto. So there was no outcome, there was no resolution, there was no condemnation of the Islamic regime other than individual speeches. That is why our coalition of 30 NGOs today sent a joint letter to 100 ambassadors demanding an emergency session of the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council. Now, these are bodies that are problematic, but when it comes to these situations where China and Russia have the veto, in the past, where there is strong Western resolve, they can adopt resolutions. There is an annual resolution adopted on Iran at the General Assembly and at the Human Rights Council, a very problematic body, which actually elected a representative of the Islamic regime to its advisory committee back on October 8th, despite our protestations. But we know from 2022 that if there is strong Western resolve, at the time it was Germany, a resolution could be brought. You might get 8 or 10 voting no. You would probably get 20 or so voting yes. A number of them out of the 47 would abstain, but a resolution could get adopted. We could get a special session. You need only 16 countries, only 16 out of 47 to support and convene a special session. A resolution could be adopted condemning the regime and creating an investigation. So I'm just going to mention briefly, it's on our website. We have 30 NGOs that have called on today ambassadors to convene an emergency session of both the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly. Again, the Security Council will not be able to adopt a resolution. Those bodies could, if France, Germany, the others take the lead, to publicly condemn the horrific killing of protesters. I'll mention the statistics in a moment. Establish independent investigative mechanisms to ensure documentation, accountability, and justice. Demand the immediate release of all individuals arbitrarily detained for exercising their fundamental rights, and to ensure sustained UN monitoring. Again, the United Nations is not going to be the body that will tomorrow stop killings, but every international institution, every national institution that can contribute to putting pressure, to putting the regime on the defensive, to mobilizing world opinion, to somehow weakening the regime, encourage the resolve of the protesters, is a welcome development. So we're calling for action from the United Nations. And it's in that context that we've convened this emergency panel to hear from world experts in Europe, in North America. With that, I'd like to give the floor to Alireza Akhondi to share with us your insights, your analysis, and your recommendations for action, whether it's the Swedish government, the EU as a whole. Alireza, please, you have the floor.
Hi, Hillel. First of all, my sincere gratitude for everything you and your organization is doing for the benefit of the freedom of the brave Iranian people. As you know, as the world knows by now, Iranians have been on the street once again, since end of December last year, demanding for their basic rights, rights that we are taking maybe in some ways granted in the Western free countries. These protests have been met by brutal force, brutal violence. We see that the security forces are shooting live ammunition. They are not trying to de-escalate. They shoot in the forehead and in the vital organs to kill. I have been reached by numerous witnesses that when parents are going to collect their children's body, they are either being forced to pay for the bullets that has killed their children, or even in some cases has get documents in front of them to write, claiming that their children had belonged to the security forces. My strong guess is that this is part of the psychological game that the regime are playing, trying to send a message to the world that the violence is from the protesters and not from the security forces. And I think it's important for us to be awake and don't be a part for the regime propaganda. About what we can do, 3 years ago today, we were around 20,000 people in Strasbourg in France, and saw adoption of an European resolution for designation of IRGC as a terrorist entity. And today, while we still see that the other European bodies, like the European member states, hasn't adopted the European Parliament resolution. Even though many activists has been doing a lot to make sure that this resolution come to an result. What can we do here and now? Pressure, 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 but not only with words. We need to see firm actions and not just condemnation. I'm not surprised that the UN didn't be able to make a resolution. The past decades, UN has been more or less a paper tiger. But I think the idea that you, Hillel, presented to go another way is a correct way to do. But I also want to send a clear message. If we want to have a regime change, and this is what I want, I think this regime doesn't have any legitimacy, not even with their own population. We need to have a plan. We need to execute that plan. We need to make sure that when the regime are turning off the internet, that we can turn on the internet in another end, so we can document and make sure that the communication with the inside is going forward. We need to help building a coalition between the Iranians opposition to make sure that they can be the voice of hope for millions of Iranians inside Iran to take the necessary steps towards their freedom. But we need to also make sure that we have, for example, an exit strategy for the regime security forces, those without blood on their hand, that we can help them help themselves to be able to stand with their brothers and sisters in the end. I think during these 3 years, I have presented at least 10, 15 different puzzle pieces to make sure that we reach our goal for regime change. But to be able to do that, we need to have a better coordination. I can stop here.
Alireza, thank you. Maybe I'll ask you briefly, as a member of the Swedish Parliament, what is your feeling on what Sweden has been doing so far? Do you feel that the Swedish government's approach has been adequate? If there are more things that they should be doing, what do you recommend? And in general, I would say, at the EU level, what would be the main action? You talked about designating IRGC. What are some other actions that you would recommend?
Yes, Hillel, I think a lot of people with Iranian backgrounds in the diaspora expect more from their governments, including me. We are sitting in opposition here. My concrete possibilities to force the Swedish government to act is limited. But I think that we need to combine symbolic actions like deporting the Islamic Republic ambassador with concrete actions as designation as IRGC, more sanctions, more pressure, and of course also help to have free internet in Iran, free media, and help to the opposition. So we cannot say that we need to do just one thing. We need to do a palette of actions. Some of them are short time, symbolic. Some of them are for real and give good results.
Thank you, Alireza. We'll move now to our next panelist, Kaveh Shahrooz. And Kaveh, maybe I'll just begin by asking you, there have been a number of Iranians and others who have found the international response to the massacre to be incredibly weak, whether it's from major media that didn't seem to be covering it at the beginning, whether it's the BBC or other major media in Canada, whether it's human rights groups that were very active on other issues and took them a long time to get active on this. What's your sense of why the international response on the Iranian Islamic regime killings, why the response seemed delayed, seemed slow, seemed weak? What's your analysis of that?
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Hillel, for convening this meeting, and thank you to UN Watch. I think you're asking an excellent question and a really important one. And frankly, I think it's important to remember that the media's shortcomings on this, or the human rights group's shortcomings with respect to this revolution that's taking place, or got started in late December, this has actually been an ongoing problem with these institutions. It's difficult to answer that question without going into some detail and criticizing them harshly. And I don't want to criticize them too harshly at the moment, because I think now is the time for all these groups to come together. But I think there is a reason why Iran's plight and the plight of Iranians tends to be ignored, and a lot of it tends to be ideological. The ideology that is really at the core of a lot of human rights groups and a lot of media is one that at its core wishes to side with those that criticize the United States, that criticize Israel. And so that's why when there are events that occur around the world that allow these institutions to condemn America or condemn Israel, they get a lot of attention. Why the events of October 7th tend to you tend to see a lot of moral confusion from these institutions where those that have been attacked are somehow deemed to be the perpetrators of a crime, and there is outcry about what they are doing without regard to the fact that an extremist group attacked them. And you see the same thing with respect to Iran. So Iran's regime, because of the position that it takes with respect to the United States, because of the position it takes with respect to Israel, tends to be treated with kid gloves in these international institutions. It tends to be given the benefit of the doubt when no benefit of the doubt is warranted. It tends to be treated charitably. Its narrative tends to be accepted and promulgated and disseminated. And it's surprising because these same institutions regularly speak about, or at least with respect to UN institutions, have in their mandate to support women, for example, LGBTQ people, workers, and so on. And yet Iran's regime brutalizes and persecutes all these groups, and yet you don't hear very much about what it does in the media or in these institutions. So I think what is needed at this point is pressure on these institutions and perhaps an ideological change in these institutions that takes their own mandates and their own responsibilities more seriously. They become more objective and neutral, and they report the facts and work on the facts as they actually appear.
Thank you. Beyond the Western response, what's your analysis today? It seems very depressing, actually. President Trump 2 weeks ago, I think it's already been 2 weeks, said that if people get shot, we're locked and loaded, and we're going to respond strongly, and made, I think, another 7 promises or threats against the regime if it takes certain actions. So far, there's been no military action by Trump. He did announce economic measures, sanctions, tariffs on countries that trade with Iran. But in terms of killings, thousands of people have been killed. I'm just going to read some statistics. Obviously, we don't have the precise statistics, but I'm going to read from the group Human Rights Activist News Agency, HRANA. This is what they call verified deaths. That they've verified 2,478 protesters have been killed since the protests began in late December. Of course, I'll mention that there's varying estimates. We know that Iran International, their editorial board, had come up with the number of 12,000. CBS News had reported 20,000. So obviously, it's going to take some time before we get the actual figures. We're talking about minimum of thousands of protesters. Even the Iranian Islamic regime has acknowledged 2,000 killed, so we can assume that it's much more than that. I'll just mention a few other statistics. We have, in terms of, there have been 618 reported protests in 187 cities, 31 provinces. 16 children have been killed, 20,000 detainees, 2,677 with severe injuries. And Kaveh, it seems now that things are a little quieter. There might be martial law in control of certain cities, that the protests have quieted. Do you think that the regime, God forbid, has been successful in stopping this revolution? Where do you see things going now?
So that's also a really important question, and I spent the last few minutes criticizing the bias of various institutions that tend to lean left, but here I really do have to criticize President Trump. As you say, he made certain promises which I think prompted a lot of people to think that the United States would have their back, and they, as a result of those promises, they went out in the streets and began protesting, and to date we haven't seen anything. And I think if the Iranian revolutionaries are abandoned, that is a great betrayal. So I really hope that we see a change in American policy. Now, with respect to your question, it's possible that the street is now quieter in Iran, and Iran's regime has managed to use brutality to get people to go back home, at least for the moment. But I don't think this revolution is going to die, for the same reason that I think in 2022, when the Woman Life Freedom movement was happening, when people would ask me, is this the end of it? And I would say, no, it's going to flare up again. And it took a few years, but it flared up again. And the reason for that is that this regime is simply incapable of responding to the grievances of ordinary Iranians. This is a regime where crimes and gender apartheid and anti-Semitism and denial of rights is embedded in its very DNA. This is a regime that was conceived in blood This is a regime that has no respect for human life. This is a regime that is kleptocratic. It is deeply corrupt, and it steals from the public purse to enrich its own officials and to pay terrorist proxies abroad. With that general makeup, with that DNA, this is a regime that will not be able to fix Iran's economy. This is a regime that will not be able to grant equality to Iran's women or Iran's ethnic and religious minorities. This is a regime that will not be able to normalize relations with the international community. This is a regime that will not be able to provide its people with water. This is a crisis that's occurring in Iran where the country is running out of water. And so for these reasons, even if it uses brutality at the moment, as it has done, as it has killed thousands, as you noted, it will only be able to give itself a few more days, a few more months, because Iranian people are courageous. They know what they want. They want to change in this regime. And soon enough, they'll be back on the street and demand what is rightfully owed to them.
Thank you, Kaveh. But before we conclude, I'll just ask for a brief, maybe 1 minute, any final remarks? Alireza, any final remarks?
Yes, Hillel. We see that this kind of protest, this kind of uprising is occurring since 2017 with months or years between. I'm 100% sure that this rotten regime will fall. The question is for the international community is what side of the of this in the history will they stand? Do they want to stand on the right side with the Iranian people, or do you want to be outside and just watch, and also be involved in the brutality of this regime indirectly? I want to also say a few words about the betrayal from President Trump that we see right now. When I think all of us are grown up with the story about the person that calling for a wolf that not occurring when you call for it. If you say that you want to do something, do it. If you're not going to do it, don't risk other people's lives. That's a really basic thing to do. And this makes me angry because behind all of these promises, there is human lives. And they are looking at us in the Western country. They are praying for our help. If we don't do what we promise, we are nothing. We are not the people that we are claiming that we are. And I hope that this was the last time we see this kind of empty promises.
Absolutely. And I hope that our disappointment, profound disappointment, will somehow be vindicated. And I know that people in the US government are watching and listening, and I hope they pay attention because the world is looking to the US for credibility. We all know Obama set a red line on Syria, and the moment he didn't follow through, American credibility was shot. That was the first invasion of Ukraine back 10 years ago, was after that red line was shot. And if Trump doesn't follow through, American credibility is finished. Kaveh, any final remarks?
Sure, I'll keep this very brief. So first of all, Hillel, thank you for convening this meeting and everything that UN Watch is doing. But frankly, this is what every UN institution should be doing. This is what every human rights organization should be doing. And it's a shame that it's a small NGO like UN Watch that's doing this. It's really speaks to the shortcoming and the moral confusion that I alluded to earlier. So I hope that we see a change there. Echoing what Alireza just mentioned, I hope we see a change in US policy to let people know that help is on the way, to say to people help is on the way and get them to come out in the street, be it the US president or some opposition leader, I think is irresponsible when no help is on the way. And it's a betrayal. And I really sincerely hope that we see a change there. I hope international pressure builds on the US government for something to be done to cripple the repressive apparatus of the Islamic regime. And finally, I want to say that I have not given up hope. I know that Iranian people want democracy, and that's what they expect the international community to support. I hope that the international community pushes the Iranian opposition to form a stronger coalition in which every constituency is represented, every ideological view is represented that is committed to democracy. And I think that's what Iranians demand of us, and that's really what we owe them for all their bravery. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Kaveh. And I'll just, as a final note, for those watching who want to help, we have a petition that will be posted in the description on our YouTube and Instagram and other social media that you can click and sign a petition to support our call on the United Nations to act. Again, although we are strong critics of the UN, when they do act, it makes a difference. There was a special session in November 22. It did, put pressure on the regime. We need whatever we can do to put pressure. The UN has levers. France is a member of the Human Rights Council. I'm here in Paris right now to demand that France convene a special session with only 15 other countries, demand that France stop designating the IRGC. We have reports from the Wall Street Journal reporter Lawrence Norman that France, Italy, and Spain are opposing the IRGC designation on the terror list, on the EU terror list, whereas other countries, the majority, they say, are supporting it. So we're going to be putting pressure both on the EU and on the UN to act. And if people want to help sign the petition, it just increases world opinion. As Kaveh said, there are too many institutions that have been, for whatever reason, have been inactive, silent, or putting this on a low boil. And we need to maximize pressure. There are millions of Iranians who are looking to us. They are defending us, as Masih Alinejad often says. Our values, our human rights values, our democratic values, the values that we claim to believe in. There are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who've been putting their lives on the line to defend our values. The least that we can do is to support them in any way. So thank you very much again to our guests. We're going to stay on it here at UN Watch. And thank you all for participating. And thank you all for watching.